Did you know that since the 1970s, the US dollar has lost 85% of its value, with 25% of that loss happening in just the last decade? Meanwhile, wages have barely moved. Why are younger generations earning so much less in real terms, even though productivity has skyrocketed by 80%? Stick around, because we're digging into the shocking truth about why the cost of living has overtaken wages, and what this means for your financial future. Degrees of debt, why education no longer pays off. Did you know that over half of recent college graduates are working jobs they're overqualified for? Think about that for a moment. Spending 4 or more years in higher education, likely accumulating debt along the way, only to end up in roles that could have been filled straight out of high school. So, what happened? Why has the connection between a college degree and a well-paying career unraveled so dramatically? For decades, a college degree was considered a guarantee of a better life. It wasn't just about getting an education, it was an investment, almost a ticket into the middle class. Graduates could expect job stability, a solid paycheck, healthcare benefits, and even the possibility of climbing the career ladder. But that promise is quickly fading. Today, 52% of young adults with degrees find themselves underemployed, languishing in jobs that don't require their qualifications. It's an uncomfortable reality that challenges everything we've been told about the value of higher education. In the job market, employers are making a subtle but significant pivot. Data shows that the percentage of job listings requiring a bachelor's degree has dropped from 20.4% in 2019 to just 17.8% in 2024. At first glance, this might sound positive. Less reliance on degrees could mean opportunities are opening up for everyone, right? But that's not what's happening. Instead, employers are shifting their focus. In many industries, they now prioritize experience, technical skills, or certifications over formal education. This translates to a job market where newly minted graduates are left scrambling to compete in an environment that no longer rewards their academic credentials. For those entering college, the financial stakes are higher than ever. A 4-year college education has become a staggering expense, with public universities charging about $11,000 a year in tuition and private schools averaging $39,000 annually. That doesn't even include housing, textbooks, and other costs that push students deeper into debt. It's no surprise, then, that the average graduate walks away with $37,000 in student loans, and for many, that's just the beginning. When you add interest and repayment timelines, loans can feel like an unrelenting weight that slows every step toward financial independence. Now let's add wages into the equation. The median starting salary for college graduates in the US hovers around $55,000. And while that may sound decent at first blush, it hasn't kept pace with inflation or the rising cost of living. Over the last 20 years, wages have grown by just 5.6% in real terms, barely enough to cover the cost of basics like rent, transportation, and food. When those same wages are paired with monthly student loan payments, it's no wonder younger generations struggle to save for the future, let alone consider milestones like buying a home or starting a family. This financial imbalance often delays major life transitions. Young adults are waiting longer to leave their parents' homes. In 2022, over 60% of people aged 18 to 29 lived with family, numbers unseen since the Great Depression. This isn't about laziness or irresponsibility. It's about an economic system that forces many young professionals to prioritize survival over progress. When tuition costs continue to rise faster than wages, and when job opportunities don't reward a degree the way they once did, independence becomes a luxury instead of a given. Yet, despite these struggles, the narrative still pushes college as a non-negotiable requirement for success. Parents encourage it, society expects it, but here's the question: is the cost justified if the return isn't guaranteed? The harsh truth is that systemic issues, not personal decisions, are often to blame. It's easy to place the burden on individuals, to ask why they chose a specific school, major, or even career path. But look closer, and you'll find a system that funnels students into debt and leaves them scrambling in an unpredictable and often unforgiving economy. The shift in how we value education goes beyond dollars and job titles. It's reshaping the career landscape. As graduates face mounting debt with fewer opportunities, they're not just entering unstable jobs, they're entering an unstable future. What used to be a clear path, step 1, go to college, step 2, build a career, has been replaced by something far murkier. And worse, this uncertainty is compounded by forces like automation and corporate restructuring, which make it even harder for young professionals to break into promising fields. For many, the promise of higher education has been reduced to what feels like a gamble. Invest tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars, and you might land a decent job. Or you might find yourself trapped in debt, working a role that has no upward mobility. The idea of education as an opportunity has been overshadowed by the reality of education as a financial burden, one that weighs heaviest on those who entered the system hoping to rise above it. But what's making all this even harder for new workers? It's not just about education. The job market itself, specifically the entry-level jobs that used to be stepping stones, has also undergone a dramatic shift, and not for the better. Automated systems, offshoring practices, and a focus on profits over people have left young graduates with fewer options than ever before. And that's where we're heading next, the vanishing entry-level job. Why is it that a job listing labeled entry-level is asking for candidates with 3 to 5 years of experience? It's a question many young workers are left asking, especially as the roles that were once stepping stones into stable careers seem to have disappeared. The truth is, entry-level jobs as we once knew them are no longer being designed for beginners. Instead, these positions have evolved into something entirely different, opportunities reserved for those who already have an established track record. This shift has created a frustrating situation for new graduates looking to start their careers. There's nowhere to actually begin. Today, around 38% of entry-level jobs in the US require experience, making it nearly impossible for those fresh out of college or training programs to compete. And it's not just about a higher bar for qualifications. At the heart of this issue is a fundamental change in how companies approach their hiring processes. Rather than investing in on-the-job training and development, many businesses now prioritize candidates who can contribute immediately to the bottom line. Essentially, they'd rather skip over new workers who might need coaching and hire someone who can hit the ground running. This creates a frustrating paradox. You can't get a job without experience, but you can't build experience without a job. But the barriers don't end there. Automation and artificial intelligence, AI, are carving out a significant piece of the job market, particularly at the entry level. Tasks that used to provide valuable learning opportunities for beginners are now being handled by algorithms and bots. Administrative assistance, data entry, and even customer service, a range of roles that taught basic workplace skills, are increasingly being replaced by tech solutions. For instance, AI systems like ChatGPT are now appearing in job descriptions as required competencies, a trend that highlights how even entry-level tech roles are becoming knowledge-intensive before people have a chance to catch up. Looking at specific industries helps paint a clearer picture. In manufacturing, where job ladders used to begin with simple, repetitive tasks, offshoring has stripped away those starting points. During the heyday of outsourcing, Americans were told that factory jobs weren't prestigious enough to worry about losing, but these positions offered young, inexperienced workers the ability to gain stability, learn how businesses operated, and climb toward more advanced roles. Now, global corporations routinely relocate such jobs to countries with lower labor costs. The same dynamic is evident in customer service, where call center jobs have increasingly moved overseas. These changes have stripped away multiple layers of entry-level opportunities in sectors that once supported millions of workers looking for a foothold. Corporate consolidation has compounded these issues as mergers and acquisitions cut down on the number of available jobs. When large companies dominate entire industries, they reduce middle and entry-level roles through layoffs and streamlining, leaving fewer opportunities for everyone, particularly those at the beginning stages of their careers. Adding to the difficulty is the fact that companies are much less inclined to promote internally than they used to be. Research shows that only 15% of job vacancies today are filled by internal candidates, a significant drop from half a century ago when that figure was as high as 60%. This means that even once inside a workplace, younger employees face fewer chances for advancement than earlier generations did. Another layer is the rise of unpaid internships as a prerequisite to paid employment. In theory, internships are supposed to bridge the experience gap, preparing students and recent graduates for the professional world, but in practice, they often create more barriers, especially for workers from lower income backgrounds. Almost half of internships in the US are unpaid, leaving many workers to survive without income while gaining essential experience. For those who can't afford unpaid work, the job market's experience requirements become nearly insurmountable. This creates a new cycle of economic exclusion, where even minor opportunities are out of reach for many capable candidates. Taken together, these trends represent a systematic breakdown of a crucial stage in the career pipeline. Where people once entered stable, full-time roles that allowed them to grow and learn, there's now a fragmented system that discourages investment in new talent. Entry-level jobs are no longer about potential, they're about immediate performance. And for workers just starting out, that dynamic leaves little room for skill building or long-term growth. It's no wonder then that many young workers are feeling stuck. Without access to reasonable opportunities, they're unable to gain the experience they need to advance, and those who do manage to land an entry-level role often find themselves overworked and undervalued, juggling responsibilities that go beyond their qualifications. The promise of building a career from the ground up feels more fragile than ever, leaving workers unsure if upward mobility is even achievable. This shift in what it takes to begin a career isn't just bad for individuals, it's bad for the economy too. By prioritizing short-term earnings over long-term development, companies risk creating a workforce that lacks the skills and resilience to navigate changing industries. And for workers, it isn't just about missing out on a paycheck, it's about missing the chance to unlock financial stability, which has ripple effects on everything from housing to retirement. These barriers are specific, tangible, and deeply tied to shifts in economic priorities that emphasize efficiency and profitability above all else. They also create long-term consequences. Without meaningful change, the gap between what workers need and what businesses offer will continue to grow wider. For young Americans, that means rethinking not just their approach to work, but their expectations for building a stable financial future. And speaking of that future, how does this all impact bigger milestones like owning a home? Let's dig into how today's collapsing job market ripples outward into housing and beyond. Gig work and shrinking benefits. The new normal. Why are full-time jobs disappearing and being replaced by gigs, contracts, and part-time work? And more importantly, what does that mean for benefits like healthcare and pensions? For many young workers entering the job market, the patchwork system of gig work has become their new reality. It offers flexibility for some, but creates a lot of instability for others. Unlike traditional full-time roles, these jobs often lack essential protections that previous generations depended on to plan their futures. This shift has redefined not just how we work, but how secure we feel, leaving many younger workers in a precarious position. To understand this change, let's take a step back. Stable, full-time employment used to provide a foundation, offering predictable paychecks, employer-sponsored benefits, and long-term job security. But in the past few decades, companies have increasingly leaned toward trimming costs by replacing full-time roles with temporary contracts, freelancers, or gig workers. This way, they save on benefits like healthcare and retirement plans while reducing their own liabilities. For workers, though, this means they're carrying more risk and uncertainty than ever before. One of the starkest examples of this shift lies in healthcare coverage. Back in 1989, 61% of young college graduates had employer-sponsored health insurance. By 2012, that figure had plummeted to just 31%, a dramatic decline in just a couple of decades. For many workers in the gig economy, access to affordable healthcare is no longer tied to their jobs, which forces them to purchase expensive insurance on their own or go without coverage altogether. This added expense makes it even harder to save for other priorities like housing or retirement. Speaking of retirement, pensions, once a centerpiece of financial security, have become a rarity. In previous generations, employees could count on their companies to set aside funds for their futures, ensuring a stable retirement. Today, that system has largely collapsed. Workers now rely on personal savings accounts like 401ks or IRAs, placing the burden squarely on their shoulders. But here's the catch. Gig work often doesn't provide access to these plans, and while freelancers can technically create their own retirement accounts, inconsistent income from contract jobs makes regular contributions difficult, if not impossible. This lack of benefits isn't affecting just one group. It cuts across multiple industries. Take ride-sharing and food delivery as examples. Companies like Uber, Lyft, and DoorDash employ millions of gig workers but classify them as independent contractors, a designation that exempts the companies from providing benefits like healthcare, paid sick leave, or retirement plans. Similarly, freelance creative professionals, writers, designers, coders, must juggle short-term contracts with little to no job security while handling their own taxes and benefits. What was once known as the freedom of self-employment has for many become a financial tightrope walk. Flexibility is often touted as the main advantage of these roles, but that flexibility comes with a hidden cost. Unlike traditional jobs, gig work doesn't guarantee steady paychecks. Workers might have a good week with plenty of assignments, followed by another when demand dries up. This inconsistency makes it nearly impossible to budget or plan for long-term goals. And while some gig workers may strike gold if they're in the right industry at the right time, the vast majority struggle to carve out even basic stability. The weakening of unions has only made these struggles worse. At one point in history, unions played a vital role in protecting workers by raising wages and securing benefits, even for non-unionized employees. They had the bargaining power to demand fair treatment and predictable work conditions. But over the past few decades, union membership in the U.S. has drastically declined, leaving workers with little leverage to negotiate better terms. Research from the Economic Policy Institute shows this decline goes hand in hand with rising income inequality. Without the collective power of unions, it's no surprise that more workers find themselves stuck in low-paying, unpredictable gigs with few, if any, safety nets. This shift isn't just a byproduct of market forces, it reflects broader economic policies. Deregulation has allowed companies to increasingly sidestep worker protections, classifying more employees as contractors to dodge responsibility. At the same time, a focus on cutting costs and maximizing profits has led to fewer companies offering benefits at all, creating an environment where gig work isn't just common, it's becoming the new standard. For young employees, this new normal creates cascading challenges. Without access to stable jobs, consistent benefits, or predictable income, long-term financial planning becomes a luxury. How can you save for a down payment on a house when the gig work you rely on barely covers rent? How do you plan for retirement without any tools or contributions from an employer? These questions point to a larger issue. The erosion of traditional careers has created a class of workers who are overworked, underpaid, and utterly unprotected. In this fractured system, financial independence feels further and further out of reach. For many, milestones like homeownership aren't delayed by months, they're postponed indefinitely. But the consequences go beyond individual struggles. When an entire generation lacks stability, the economy as a whole suffers. That's why these trends matter. They don't just define how we work, but also how we live. But what do all of these shifts mean when it comes to achieving larger financial goals like owning a home? Let's talk about how the gig economy and shrinking benefits directly impact housing in America. From paychecks to rent checks, the housing impact. Why does it take a six-figure income, around $150,000 a year, to afford even half the homes in many major U.S. cities these days? This question highlights one of the biggest barriers facing younger generations: the sheer mismatch between what people earn and what housing costs in today's market. To start, wages have barely budged, while the cost of living, especially housing, has skyrocketed. For context, housing prices in the U.S. have surged 39% between 2019 and 2025. At the same time, interest rates have risen, making home loans more expensive and further pushing homeownership out of reach for many. For a first-time buyer, this means needing a significantly higher income to qualify for a mortgage and cover monthly payments. But with stagnant wages and limited job opportunities, how can the average worker keep up with these exploding costs? Here's a snapshot of just how daunting it's become. In major metropolitan areas, it's now common for households to need an income of $150,000 or more annually just to afford half the homes on the market. Let that sink in for a moment. $150,000 isn't the top 1%. It's what middle-class families need just to break in. And if you think this is isolated to cities like San Francisco or New York, it's not. Over 40% of the nation's largest metro areas now fall into this category, meaning the financial barrier to home ownership isn't just a problem in traditionally expensive markets. It's spreading across the country, but it's not as simple as throwing more money at the problem. For millennials and Gen Z, massive student loan debt eats into those earnings before they've even had a chance to build savings. The average young adult graduates with $37,000 in student loans, creating monthly payments that make saving for a down payment feel almost impossible. Pair that with underemployment, where more than half of recent college graduates are stuck in jobs that pay far less than they expected, and you end up with a generation struggling to scrape together even the basics. This creates a domino effect. Without stable incomes or robust savings, young adults are entering the housing market at a disadvantage. They compete not only with other buyers, but with investors and real estate companies buying up properties for rent. And because traditional entry-level jobs no longer provide the benefits or financial growth they once offered, workers find it nearly impossible to move from renting to owning. A 5% down payment on an average-priced home could easily take years to save, especially when every spare dollar is already stretched thin, paying for loans, rent, and living expenses. The rental market offers no escape either. Monthly rents have skyrocketed in tandem with home prices, leaving young adults stuck in a loop. Instead of building savings, they're spending more than 30%, sometimes over 50%, of their take-home pay just to keep a roof over their heads. This makes the math of saving for a down payment feel like chasing a mirage. As a result, many have no choice but to stay in shared housing or move in with family. In fact, the rate of young adults living with parents or relatives has surged to its highest levels since the Great Depression, a clear reflection of how unaffordable housing has become. Think about what this means for long-term financial stability. Renting alone doesn't build equity, so the longer young adults are forced to delay buying homes, the further they fall behind in creating wealth. Home ownership, for decades, has been a primary way for Americans to build financial security. Without it, generational wealth becomes harder to accumulate, leaving younger people at an economic disadvantage compared to their parents and grandparents. This isn't about bad budgeting or individual decision-making. It's about systemic changes that have made achieving financial independence harder than ever. The collapse of entry-level job opportunities, the rise of underemployment, and the crippling weight of student debt all play into this housing crisis. These aren't isolated problems. They're intertwined and show just how many roadblocks today's young workers face when trying to reach key milestones like owning a home. On paper, it might seem like a housing market issue, But the deeper problem runs back to the job market itself. A generation unable to build stable careers or save money is pushed into financial limbo, and the consequences extend beyond the immediate inability to buy property. These challenges ripple out to every aspect of life, from retirement security to raising a family. For many, the American dream of owning a home is no longer attainable, but what's truly at risk is the broader idea of economic mobility. So, what does this mean for the future of homeownership? For starters, we can't ignore that the housing market reflects far bigger trends in the economy. Rising costs, exploited workers, and a lack of stability all play a role in making financial independence feel further out of reach than ever. Addressing the housing crisis, then, means tackling its root causes in the job market and beyond, because when you strip away those opportunities, you're not just making it harder for people to buy homes, you're reshaping how they imagine their futures entirely. And that's the real challenge this generation is up against. The job market hasn't just shifted, it's been restructured in ways that make financial independence harder to achieve for younger generations. Traditional pathways, like earning a college degree or landing a full-time job with benefits, no longer guarantee stability. Instead, rising costs, shrinking opportunities, and systemic changes have created a challenging environment. If you're planning your financial future, it's time to rethink old assumptions about education, jobs, and housing. Adjusting to today's realities means exploring new paths to independence and security. The American dream isn't dead, but it's evolving. The question now is, how will we choose to reshape it,